I'm sure that the list is very long, but I
Yes,
want to be aware of the time that we have today with the group.
of course, yes. Let's go to I would like to go with Alexander. No, we did that one already. Jose Prudencio Padilla. Let's go with Jose Prudencio Padilla, and I'm just going to be brief with him. Jose Prudencio Padilla was born in Colombia. At the age of 23 or a little bit older than that, he became part of the military. Again, this was part of the movement in that particular area with Simon Bolivar. He was under the command of Simon Bolivar. He joined the Navy at the time, and then became the admiral of the Navy under Simon Bolivar as well. He helped Simon Bolivar in the struggle to liberate, which is called the Gran Colombia, Great Colombia. Then after the war was over and Colombia was able to be free, he then ran for Senate. He became the first Black Senate in Latin America. The first Black senator in Latin America. But then in that process, he had, again, the mestizos did not like the fact that they had, first of all, an admiral, well-respected military person, and a senator among them. So they didn't like that idea. And what they did, they then created this narrative, falsely accusing him to trying to assassinate the president of Colombia, joining forces with the vice president. So the vice president and Jose Prudencio Padilla, both of them were sentenced to death. Now, here's the thing, the difference. The vice president was given the opportunity to live in exile after being, condemned to death. He was given the opportunity to live in exile while Jose Prudencio Padilla was executed because he was Black, right? Thank God now that in Colombia, the Colombian Navy named their, that part of the military with his name. So that's a good thing that happened, with Jose Prudencio Padilla. And the last one I want to mention is Cabral. Again, he's from Argentina, Juan Bautista Cabral, another Argentinian military individual. He didn't spend much time in the army because he got wounded and killed. And this is how it happened. He was in a battle, again, for independence for Argentina. And the general that was leading the battalion, the group of military that he was part of, fell from his horse, and the horse just stepped on his leg and trapped him right there. And he was in the middle of the fire. The enemy was shooting at him and on the soldiers. And so Juan Bautista Cabral just left. I mean, he left the security of his position where he was, and he ran to rescue his general. And by doing so, which he did, he liberated the general from the horse. He pulled him out, and by doing so, he got shot several times and was killed. He got wounded and was killed. So that's again another African who participated in the liberation movement of Latin America, which again, these are names and individuals that we don't hear much about. But
and I mean, they're powerful. They're powerful stories. That's where I'm kind of also having trouble with this, because people love a story. They love, a hero's journey. Yes. And these are amazing stories that you've shared. So I'm, struggling to understand what is the reason Black history is left completely out of the Latin American narrative.
Well, the short answer to that is discrimination. That's one of the reasons. The other answer to it has to do, again, going back to the past. And that is that you had a movement of the people in power, which were the mestizos who were in power, decided then that they need to enabled the nations of Latin America to look like Europe.
Mm.
So, and the reason why they did that, and they came up with this concept and philosophy, because whites were the minority back then. The number of blacks, African descendants, and the number of the native people, those numbers were growing. And so whites were basically shrinking at the moment, at that time. And so they didn't want that. They wanted the nation to look white. They wanted the nation to look European. So they came up with this concept, with this philosophical concept of creating what is called the blanqueamiento in Spanish, which means the whitening of the nation. And what they did, well, they invited Europeans to come into America. And the way they did that and how they encouraged the white migrants to come over to the land is by providing them land, by providing them means for them to survive, meaning that in some countries they even offered money for families to come over to settle in the Hispanic American. And so they opened up the immigration to all people in Europe that wanted to come over, and they did, although the philosophy was not successful in many nations, but it was very successful in Brazil, it was successful in Argentina, it was successful in Venezuela, and Ecuador, and Paraguay, I believe, other nations. But Argentina was the most successful of all the nations when it opened the door for white people to come in. So that concept of whitening, developed this concept of saying that white is better, white is perfect, black, as you see in the picture, was something negative that you don't associate with black people. Black people don't deserve to be in position of power, don't deserve to be recognized. All they should be doing is basically doing the work of slaves, and not being included into the process. So that concept, blanqueamiento, is what basically created the negative understanding and concept, and also the exclusion of blacks into the history. The other has to do with the church. Unfortunately, it's not about the church itself as a religious institution, but it also has to do with what has been called today by many sociologists is called the Catholic culture, or meaning that the ethics and the cultural understanding of Catholicism in Latin America still live today, meaning that the practices, what people do, not in terms of what they practice, not in terms of their faith, but because of tradition, has become very influential. And so the church played a huge role also in creating this narrative of separation and discrimination, so that the community can also continue to discriminate and isolate Black people in the land. Again, remember in the first conversation that we had with Miami Mocat, a creative conversation, I explained that the church viewed Blacks as merchandise, and also as people without soul. And so because they did not have soul, according to the church, it was okay to enslave them. It was okay to mistreat them. It was okay to sell them as property and use them that way and abuse them as they fit. So that was those basically. I could probably, and there more, but I could share with you reason for Black history have been left out of the narrative in Latin America, because these nations and community did not want to deal with anything that was Black, that looked Black, or had anything to do with Blackness and Africa in particular.
Yeah. You learn about slavery here in the United States, and now this, it's like horrifying nightmare after horrifying nightmare is what it seems like. It doesn't, you just wonder, like, how could these things be real? How could these things just happen? But they did. They did happen.
Yes.
And I feel like I do know the answer, but I'm still going to ask. Now in modern times, I mean, obviously we have racism here in the United States. In Latin America, are we seeing similar struggles and issues?
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. The Latin America also has a lot of issues, particularly regarding the Black community. You know, after the independence and after the nations were established and they were well formed and organized, one of the things that they did, as I mentioned previously, is that not only that they, you know, told the Black people that they should not be a part of the process of the government, but also what they did, the mestizo community, what they did, created policies to restrain and prohibit Black people to improve themselves. And how did they do that? Well, simple. They created law, for example, and perhaps it might happen here in the United States, it may have happened here in the United States, but in Latin America, they created laws, for example, prohibiting Black people from owning land. Okay, so Black people could not own land in the nation, in any part of Latin America. They were prohibited to do that. So without land, they weren't able to produce, you know, they basic food and basic needs, or even live, you know, in dignified places. So many of them then, what they did, many of them created communities on their own. You know, in Mexico, for example, you had Gaspar Yanga in Veracruz, which the city todavía, it still has the name. I just said a word in Spanish here. Still has the name. That is the Yanga community, which they have a huge statue of this African, you know, liberating and huge fighter and leader of the Mexican liberation movement, African liberation movement. So they created communities like that in Ecuador. Esmeraldas, for example, you have people that were some of them were runaway slaves that created all these communities. So they had to really find places to live. The Garifuna community, for example, in Honduras, they lived in an area on the northern coast of Honduras and the beach area. These were areas that, you know, the nation was not interested in that land. Today, however, it's a different story. They killing all the Black people and the leaders in that area and incarcerating them because they want to take the land away. But back then, land was something that the African community and their descendants was unable to obtain because there were restrictions regarding that. The other reason had to do with education. They created laws also to prohibit Black people from obtaining education. I mean, that is, I get enraged, perhaps I may say, if that's the, I guess that's the word that comes to mind when I read this kind of information on history and what happened to our ancestors. I mean, prohibiting people from getting a basic education. You know, they did not want them to learn. They wanted them. The basic idea here behind all this is that they wanted the Black community to continue to be exactly the way the conquistadores, the way the Spanish, the colonists created them and left them to be slaves. They wanted to perpetuate, you know, slavery in Black community, and so they created all these laws. Again, lack of education, not allowing them to own land, and the other part of it is that they also did not allow them to obtain jobs, you know, that other people, mestizos, were able to obtain. They created barriers, you know, to stop Black people from obtaining any jobs that they felt belonged to the Mestizo community.